Hello and welcome back to Vox Terra. You might have heard about some of Trump's pardons during his final days. Trump pardoned several of what are called military contractors, or sometimes referred to as mercenaries, who were convicted of murder in Iraq. The contractors worked for a private security force then called Blackwater. According to an article in Common Dreams, December 23, 2020 by Brett Wilkins, the pardoned men were convicted for their roles in the Nisour Square Massacre in central Baghdad. This was during the time of the US-led invasion, which included the death of a 9-year-old. According to Democracy Now! and other articles, Blackwater was founded by Eric Prince. And not to pick on any individuals, I'm more looking at the system, but it's still helpful to keep some of these names in mind for our purposes today. From Democracy Now! March 10th, 2020, which was before the pardons, they had an article titled, "War Contractor Eric Prince Has Close Ties to the White House," and report reveals his dirty tricks for Trump. From that article, the relationship between the Prince family and Trump administration is significant. He was a huge donor. His sister Betsy DeVos, not to pick on names again, but it's helpful for this, Secretary of Education, also a donor. They are close to the Mercer family, Mercer's big donors of the Trump administration, and supporters of Steve Bannon. Bannon is a close friend of Eric Prince. Now the Mercers I've also heard of as along with the name the Koch brothers as being funders of climate change denial, by the way. More from that article, interestingly, the Blackwater founder was also found in an investigation done by the New York Times to have, quote, recruited former spies to infiltrate and gather intelligence about a Democratic congressional campaign and the American Federation of Teachers. So that's pretty interesting. Betsy DeVos is seen as being pro-school charters, and now there's this investigation of the American Teachers Federation of Teachers, domestic spying, who's really on the side of freedom, that kind of thing. But let's not just look at this as an example of the horrors of war or whose side we're on here. I want to look at how people, in my opinion, get tricked into supporting wars that are actually against their own interest, against the interest of not just human life, but even our survivability as a species in terms of our environment. There I'm talking about the Iraq War. Well, one of the reasons why I actually never supported the war, even though now I was actually opposed to it, and I took a lot of heat from my coworkers and acquaintances, many of whom all now claim they are against the war the whole time. I don't find that to be true, but that's what people are saying now. So here's some of the reasons why I never got sucked into the war propaganda, which was put out by the Bush administration, in my opinion, and really parroted by the media. Well, the media always gave counter details to invading, but you really have to look for those details. So here's where I was coming from. I had this in mind to look for those details. One, I understand the concept of the military-industrial complex, and everyone should know that term, military-industrial complex. It was coined, I believe, by President Eisenhower, who was warning about the ties between the private military industry, the arms contractors, arms manufacturers, and government. Consider the ties between the fossil fuel industry and government. Now, in this case, though, in this case of these Trump pardons here of Blackwater, we're not just looking at arms manufacturers privately supplying weaponry to the U.S. military and militaries around the planet. We're also looking at the privatization of military itself in the form of what are called private security contractors or mercenaries. So if you're keeping in mind that elements of the business community have a privatization agenda, that the fossil fuel petrochemical industry is extremely powerful within our government, as is the weapons manufacturing industries. But not just that, they're also powerful within our media through maybe interlocking boards of directors or the power of advertisers or that type of thing. If you're keeping all that in mind, you're much more likely to be skeptical, or we're much more likely to be skeptical about that Iraq invasion. Like an interesting detail from that time period, or a telling detail, was that in Iraq at that time, under the Ba'ath Party, which is the party Saddam Hussein belonged to, the oil industry was nationally or publicly owned in Iraq. So now, even when I was presenting some of those points to my fellow Americans, and people still give me pushback, I would usually conclude with, and still would to this day, let's just consider how much good all of this militarism and adventurism actually does the people of the country. of any country for that matter. Consider the example of England and the author Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens was writing his tales of the grinding poverty in England at a time when England was a very wealthy empire. Yet all of the money funneling back to England from that wealth, from that empire, wasn't really benefiting the average people. And in this case of the Iraq invasion, it undermined not only the stability of the Middle East, but also the environmental stability of our planet by, as it represented, in my opinion, another commitment to the fossil fuels. In fact, even the choice of electing George W. Bush over Al Gore represented another commitment to fossil fuels. Remember, Al Gore actually campaigned on climate change, wanting to keep the United States in something called the Kyoto Accord, which was similar to the Paris Agreement of the time. George W. Bush, having somewhat of that bully, tough guy, kind of a friendly personality, friendlier than Donald Trump in my opinion, no offense if you like Trump, but George W. Bush had a bit of that mocking personality shared with Donald Trump. George Bush mocked Al Gore, calling him Ozone Al. Well, most people voted for Al Gore, like most people voted for Hillary Clinton, but a lot of people were taken in by George W. Bush. And what did we get? Instead of staying in the Paris or the Kyoto Accord and addressing climate change, we were convinced to invade Iraq. Well, I hope you found today's video helpful. If you did, please subscribe to my channel. Please click the notification bell so you know I'm putting up a new video. Please share, like, comment, and until next time, peace be with you.